Well, folks, it's finally starting to happen. The people of Yemen are getting back on their feet, and they're out for vengeance. They're out for blood. Yemen has been at war with the West and the West's allies, namely Saudi Arabia, the UAE, for 9 years now. That's how long ago Barack Obama launched his war of convenience on the people of Yemen, that as of 2021, 2 years ago, according to the UN, killed 377,000 people. There have been more people killed since then. What was the other statistic? 85,000 children starved during the famines of, like, what was that, like 14 to 16 in the early years? Or no, maybe that was up through 2018. Anyway, a very, very ghastly situation. It is kind of largely wrapped up. I mean, it's not over because the U.S. and Saudi Arabia will never admit defeat. But last I checked, the Houthis are largely in control where it matters. And so now the Houthis are starting to fight back against the West in a very limited way. They've declared war on Israel, which I think I mentioned on this channel. It made some news a few weeks back. The Houthis are, kind of coming out and trying to define themselves as, defenders of the Palestinians. They've launched some missiles towards Israel. But where they're really starting to make an impact now is by seizing Israeli cargo ships, Israeli-owned cargo ships, because the way that international shipping works, I don't quite understand it, but you normally are. There's only a few countries that people tend to flag their cargo ships with, like as far as where the boat's actually registered. I assume it has something to do with taxes. I know that Northern Mariana Islands is one of them. People pick a lot. This latest ship that has been seized by Yemen was flagged by Liberia, but it was owned by Israelis. And this is fitting that the Houthis would choose to make their stand by seizing cargo ships, because that is exactly what the West did to Yemen. What was the most egregious, perhaps, act, although it's hard to pick one, during this whole war against Yemen, launched on all sides, which is still technically ongoing. It was the blockade at, I believe, Hodeidah, which the Houthis now control. The West blocked all ships coming in. They blocked food, which contributed to the starvation of tens of thousands of people. Actually, what am I saying? There were probably well over 100,000 that died of starvation, because that figure I read off earlier, the 85,000 children who died of starvation, those were just the kids. Those kids would have had parents, and the parents are going to try and feed their kids first. Then you've got all the elderly, who are going to be weak to begin with. And the reason why they had no food domestically was not only because of a long buildup, an economic war against Yemen, dating back to the 90s, sort of a stealth softening of the ground, in which Western economic interests pushed Yemeni farmers away from growing food for their domestic for domestic consumption, and towards growing things like coffee, which are more valuable cash crops that they could export. But then when you have a war that is launched on you from the outside world, that was completely unprovoked, that was a war of extermination and genocide, well, then you can't export your crops anymore because you're under blockade. So you can't earn money to buy food to import. And even if you had the money to import food from other countries, the United States did not permit that food to enter the country. So then you had farmers, the few who were still growing food for the domestic market, they couldn't grow enough. But even when they did, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, really the U.S., because Saudi Arabia would have no air force without the United States. It's really Saudi in name only. You have Americans that do all the work, that supply all the parts, that produce all the planes, and maintain all the equipment. And then you'll have some, Saudi prince who thinks he's Maverick, jump in the cockpit and, go fly a sortie and bomb flocks of sheep in a field. They bomb grain silos, anything they can to destroy the food supply. Then they bomb the water treatment plants, so everyone gets cholera, everyone gets sick. They poison the water. Nuclear annihilation would have been a more humane alternative to the war that the West waged against Yemen. And so I'm disgusted by every Westerner I see who is somehow upset with what the Houthis are doing now. What they're doing is nothing. Oh, boo-hoo. An oil tanker was seized. They stole your oil. You stole hundreds of thousands of lives. I'm not saying that stealing oil is okay. I'm saying you have no leg to stand on. I'm saying you have no position to criticize any of this. None of this is on the same level, because the people of Yemen are not capable of exacting revenge upon the West. What was done to them, they could never do back to us. When it comes to the oppression Olympics, Yemenis, they win every medal. Gold, silver, and bronze in every single event. And all those crimes were committed by Israel's best friend, the Americans. And since Yemen can't take on America directly, doing one small thing to piss in the cornflakes of America's little brother, that makes sense to me. I can see why, from their perspective, this is the perfect opportunity. This is the closest thing to revenge those people will ever get. And I'm not saying revenge is a good thing. But when you compare to how the U.S. reacted to 9/11, 3,000 Americans killed, and we go murder 1 million people who had nothing to do with it, not one of them. The U.S. goes to Iraq, slaughtering 1 million of the people who lived there, when the folks who blew up the Twin Towers were Jordanian and Egyptian and Saudi Arabian. The Iraqi government, of course, was allied against al-Qaeda. Israel, if you think of it that way, much better target than Iraq. As we hear all the time, Israel is America's greatest ally. And the Houthis, to my knowledge, they're not killing civilians. They're just seizing these cargo ships and taking possession of the contents of the ships. And, frankly, I think they could justify that as war reparations. I would rather they directly seized American-owned cargo if they were going to do that in the name of war reparations. But that would not be very smart on their part, and they would probably be annihilated. So I think they're doing what they can. I think that they're trying to be smart about this. And so, no, this is not terrorism. Just like the war against the Yemenis was not terrorism. Because terrorism is violence in pursuit of political change. That's what terrorism is. You try and blow up a few buildings, and then people will start voting the way you want. That's the idea behind terrorism. Or you blow up a couple buildings, and then the leaders just go ahead and say, okay, we'll do as you wish. That's terrorism. What was done in Yemen, perpetrated by the United States, were just acts in pursuit of the extermination of the population. The destruction of the food supply, the poisoning of the water supply, the displacement of the population. That was just murder upon murder upon murder and destruction. There was no logic to it. There was never going to be some American puppet, who was going to take over Yemen. That was never an option. Once the fighting ended, the Houthis were going to control everything that, or at least most everything that was being fought over. And so there was nobody who could have changed their behavior as a result of, like, let's say this was terrorism, all the bombing in America that America did. Let's say there were people who could change their behavior, and then America would stop bombing them. That would, okay, that would make sense. That would be terrorism. But there wasn't. There was nothing these people could do to appease the Americans. There was nothing that was going to make America stop. So this was well beyond terrorism. There are no goals. Just like, with Hamas kidnapping these Israeli citizens. Why did they do it? It was an act of terrorism because they are trying to use those people as leverage to achieve their political goals. And so the same thing here with the Houthis. This is not like what Hamas did. This is like what the U.S. did to the Houthis. The U.S. said, we're just going to destroy your stuff. We're going to take away your food, certainly your fuel. I mean, they never had fuel. And the Houthis are now saying to little America, to Israel, we're just going to take your oil because we can and we want it. And, you destroyed our country. And we need to start rebuilding. So we're going to take stuff from you to do that because it's your fault. And do I think it's fair to hold Israel accountable for America's actions? To a certain extent, yes, because, one, it's fair because America gets blamed for Israel's actions, because America did not intervene to change Israel's behavior. America does not put up a fit or anything. And the same goes for Israel. I mean, this was one of Israel's neighbors, Yemen, and the U.S. was engaged in a genocide there, and Israel didn't utter a peep in defense of the people of Yemen. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.